In this video, I want to demo my new module, PSSnow. It's a PowerShell module for interacting with the ServiceNow REST API. Now you can find it under PSSnow or just search for ServiceNow and it'll pop up. There is a link through to the project site and GitHub repo, and all the information is on here if you need to go through it. There's a good comprehensive user guide with some links, some examples and all sorts. So once you've installed it from the gallery, the first thing you'll need to do is set authentication. You can use basic, but OAuth is recommended. There is a link on the user guide as well, which is on the ServiceNow website, and they tell you a little bit more about how OAuth works and how to set up an app registry. I've already done that, so I've got an ID and secret, and I'm providing the credential as well. So once I run this command, it uses the credential to get the initial token. That credential is then no longer required and it's disposed of. By default, the initial token, the access token, expires after 30 minutes, and then normally what you would have to do is make another call to obtain a new token with using the refresh token. Now, this module just looks after all of that for you, so you don't need to worry about that. So once you've made this command, once you've run this command, you could, for example, run the get snow object command, go away for half an hour, come back, run it again, and it will realize the token's expired and grab a new one. So the table API has, let me just click on user guide, it has 4 main template functions. So get, set, new, and remove snow object, so the CRUD operations. Now if we actually look at the directory for the module itself and go into the public folder, it's split by API. Under table we've got quite a lot of functions, not just those 4. But the idea is that those 4 are sort of generic. You can interact with any table using them. All the other functions of the same verb type inherit the parameters from that template function, so they work in very much the same way. The only difference is that they have the table defined in them, so you don't need to specify that. And they also have parameters for all of the objects in that table. So it's a little bit more user-friendly with auto-completion and other quality of life improvements. And the way that this is built is that it's very easy to maintain these, even though there's quite a lot, because the underlying framework abstracts away from all the complex code. So really, if we look at a quick function, get snow user, we can see it's really simple. We've got the function name, a list of all the parameters which are relevant to the object's properties, or should I say the table properties, and then dynamic parameters, we are importing the parameter set from our template function. We're defining the table, and then everything else is being passed into a private function and handled from there. So it's very easy. If you've got a bunch of custom tables, you can literally copy and paste this file, rename it, change the parameters, and off you go. Now on that note, there is actually a function builder as part of this repo. It's not part of the module, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but the premise is you can run once you clone the repo, you can run a command, provide it with a table name and a function name, and it will build a new table function for you. It does that using some boilerplate, which we've got in here. So just to give you an example on the get command, you can see obviously the template is this. It will fill all these placeholders and build out the parameter set based on information that it obtains from ServiceNow. So it'll reach out to that table that you specified, grab all the properties, it'll work out if there's any mandatory properties, any display values, in which case it'll set aliases and that sort of thing. And most of the actual table functions in here were built using that. So let's just show you the get snow object command. So we first of all have to tell it which table we want to interact with. So in this case, I'm going to do the user table. I'm going to stick a verbose on there. Now you might have thousands and thousands of users and you might be worrying about that call timing out. Don't, because it does handle pagination automatically under the hood. So you can see in the verbose output, it's a pending 1000 limit on there, and it will just increment the offset 1000, 2000, and so on until it loops through, iterates through all the records and pulls everything back. You can actually interact with pagination manually as well if you need to do that for any other integrations. So that's just using limit and offset. So we could do 10, 20, 30, and so on. So obviously limit 1 to get 1 record. We could do sysid. Every object in ServiceNow has a sysid, which is a unique identifier, and it's just basically a GUID. And then lastly, there is a query method where we could supply the property we want to look at with an operator like equals or like or starts with. Oops. So you can see we've got Abraham Lincoln. So what we can do, if you don't know the operators to use or you don't know that language and you don't really want to look it up in the documentation, the easiest way is just to come into ServiceNow, find the table you want, and use the filters. So we could do last name is Lincoln. It's really handy if you've got loads of saved advanced filters. You can just right click on here and copy query and paste that straight in. So that's the get snow object in a nutshell. And then obviously all the other commands like get snow user, the ones that are table specific. We don't need to provide a table name, and we've got all the nice auto completions. But we can still use things like dash query and the other things we saw. We've got new snow object. Let's just create a new user called Batman. So we can see our record here. We passed a couple of properties and a photo property. Now this one is an example of why these quality of life improvements for the table specific functions are important, because this is actually a reference field. So it's a reference to another table, the attachment table to be specific. So if I look at the user that we've created, we can see photo is set to the string that we provided, which is just a local path to my machine. That's never going to work. And we don't really want to modify new snow object because it's a generic function, so it could interact with any table. So the quality of life improvements added to this function instead. Oops, back to my terminal. So we can run the same sort of command with the same sort of properties. But this time we can see in the verbose output it's created the user with a post, and then it's done another post using the sysid of the user that was created to attach that to the photo that is also uploaded. And we can see that there. So it just means that we get a nicer experience. We don't have to put in extra code really to make those calls and so on. We can pipe everything, so the new user variable that we populated, we can pipe that into set snow user to change the email address, for example. So I've got pass-through on there, and we can see the email address is updated in the console, and we can also see it's updated here. And we can use remove snow object in the same vein. There's functions for interacting with the attachment API. So these objects in ServiceNow, every object has a sysid for the unique identifier, and most objects also have a sys class name, which identifies the table that it's from. So in this case, we've got sys class name as sys user. So we can pipe that into different API functions as well. So get snow attachment. That's not going to return anything because we don't have an attachment, but we could pipe it into new snow attachment and upload a CV. Sorry, CSV, not CV. So we can see that there. And now if I run this get snow attachment, we can see the actual file name and all the metadata for that attachment record and the download link. Now we can use pass-through on there. What that will do is return the exact same object again, but it will have the additional property for content. So in this case, because it's a raw, a plain text file, we can see that plain text. And we can do, a nice pipe straight into convert from CSV, and we've got a perfectly um, formatted object. So we don't have to really mess around with interacting with the file system. But if you want to, you can. So let me just open up a Explorer window here. So we can pipe new Snow user and get Snow attachment. At the moment we've only got one, but if I had more, it would pull them all. And we're specifying just the folder path, just this parameter. So it's taking the file name from ServiceNow and then using that to save the document. There is use cases where you might want to change that file name, in which case you can supply output file name and the new file name that you want it to be called. So let's just have a quick look as well at this parameter, disregard source table. Now, there is a few instances where there is files, there is attachments that are considered hidden. So the photo is one example of that. It's technically an attachment, even though it's not showing at the top here. There's just a field on that property, on that object, that is prefixed, so it's sort of hidden in effect. But it's the same. It's the same thing. It is just another attachment. So if we use this parameter, we can see those hidden attachments. So in this case, we've got Batman enemies CSV, and we've got photo. So let's just save that into the attachments variable here, and then we'll pipe that into remove snow attachment, confirm false, and we'll refresh our page. And we can see both the attachment at the top and the photo have been deleted. The other cool API is batch API. Now this is really handy. I've been in a few organizations and I've seen this sort of code before, where all the data from a table is pulled, we're iterating over it, making a change or completing an action and then writing back to the table one record at a time. And that's really, really inefficient. It's not a good way of doing it. If you've got 5,000 users and you want to update all the email addresses this way, it's going to take you a really long time, not to mention it's going to be a burden on the API. So what we can do is we can actually wrap this code. We don't need to change it. We just wrap it with invoke snow batch. And what that's doing under the hood is it's looking, it's saying get snow user. We don't need to touch that because it's paginated. That's fine. Set snow user on the other hand, it appends a hidden parameter which prevents it from making the actual live call to the REST API, and instead it returns an object which invoke snow batch captures, and it bundles those objects together into batches and then submits them in groups to the batch API. I've also got a parallel flag on here which you don't have to submit, but we can make things even faster still. So if I've got, let's say, 500 requests, normally you just run this on its own and it would take 500 calls to update all of those requests. It would take a long time. With invoke snow batch, I think the batch size is 100. I might be wrong, but I can't remember now what I set it to. But that might be 5 batches. So it'll do 5 calls consecutively, which won't take long at all. With parallel, it'll make those calls in parallel and it'll be done in a flash. And that actually uses Rambling Cookie Monster's invoke parallel under the hood, which I've used many times in the past. It's really good. So all credit goes to him on that one. But I've used that specifically because it provides 5.1 compatibility. So we can see the get command has been run and we've got 621 requests in 5 batches, which has been performed. Now if we look at the result, we can see the output of those batches and we can drill down into them if we want to see more details. So for example, here I'm grouping objects by the status text and we've got an OK status, or we could do it by the HTTP code 200 in this case, and then we can drill down right into the actual body of the response. We can see those objects that are returned. And we can also see that it did make the live change here. The import API allows you to also push data into import tables, so staging tables. You might want to run some transform maps and then push that data further on into your production table. So this allows you to do the same. And you can use new Snow import for that just by providing a table name and then a list of key value pairs for the properties. Again, this is supported by invoke Snow batch, and all new and set commands hopefully should be in the module. So in this case, I'm taking a movie CSV, which has got 10 rows, pushing it into the U movies import table. The output looks like this. And we might get a status text to say if the record's been created, if it's been ignored because it already exists, or if it's been updated. I won't go into the table, but it would show data in this table because I have a transform map from my staging table into the production table. And then lastly, we've got the, actually no, second to last, we've got the aggregate API, which allows you to pull metrics really quickly rather than having to pull all the data back and then do it in PowerShell. So in this case, I've got a query active equals true, and I'm just asking for the count. But you can run, very advanced queries on there with aggregation if you want to do min, max, average, sum, that sort of thing. But there's plenty of documentation on the ServiceNow wiki, which goes into all those details. The last thing is the service catalog API. So let's quickly jump into the service catalog. So there might be cases where you want to log a request, like a user going into the service catalog and logging a request or an incident or something else. The main use case for this is because if you use the table API to create a request, let's say a written requested item, you're not going to get the actual the parent request or the child tasks that might be spawned off of that, or the approval or the workflow. There's a lot of different moving parts that wouldn't necessarily happen if you just create the table record. So that's what you've got to be careful of. The service catalog really allows you to create those requests in the same manner that a user would. So everything else will happen as it normally should do. So in this case, I'm going to go into whitelist IP request. And I'm just going to go into the URL. Don't think I've got that shown in the video, but let me grab. So in the URL, you'll find the sysid. It's just an easy way to grab the GUID for the actual form itself. But you can find it from the table API also. So this is the sysid for this form. So let's do new snow SC card item. We'll put the sysid in here, and then we'll provide some properties. Now what we really need, let me just get rid of this. What we really need is an example of one of these forms already filled out, just to understand which properties to put in here, because yes, we can see the display labels, but that's not going to translate to the actual values that we need to provide here. So let's go ahead and do that. If we go into requested items, there'll probably be one that I've logged before. Yeah, there is here. So let's take this written number and let's do get snow written variable set. Oops. So we can see this is the format that it understands. And if we quickly jump back to the service catalog and that form, I've got primary contact, IP range, which is here, business purpose, and cost center. So let's just grab this and put that in our hash table. Okay, and we'll just stick that with 99 so we know that this is one we've just logged. Testing 1, 2, 3. And we'll stick a verbose on there. And a pass-through. And also checkout. Because it's essentially a cart. So depending on your instance of ServiceNow, you might just have a submit button that automatically does that in the background. But we have to provide that as a parameter because not everyone's instance is going to be the same. So there we go. It's returned back the request number. I can go back to my instance and just do a quick search for that request. So we've got the parent request, which has a child written with the whitelist IP address, and we can see all of those properties that we've just supplied. And we've also got the tasks that have been spawned off the back of that as well. So that's really it in a nutshell. That's most of the features. There is a few other things that I've not quite covered, but I'm going to keep adding to this as time goes along. The wiki has a never-ending list of APIs, so there's plenty that can be hooked into. But I think these are probably the core ones for PowerShell integrations at least. And I'm hoping that it will help a lot of people out. There is a few modules out there on the gallery at the moment, but my personal experience is that they're a bit lacking in features compared to what this provides. There is a few sort of paid licensed ones that you've got to pay for yearly, and I'm not really a fan of that. So hopefully this will bridge that gap. And yeah, if you do have any issues or feedback, I'd appreciate any comments you've got. Feel free to log issues on the GitHub repo or even contribute if you're that way inclined. Thanks.